Servus, Matthias here, and this is Single Track. This week, we're heading north to the city of glass, beautiful Vancouver, BC, Canada. David Papineau runs this city, collects every mask discarded on the street, and knows every block, every alley, and every restricted area. He's a graphic designer by trade and created all the iconic artwork for Coast Mountain trail running. His entertaining stories of trail races and marathons around the Pacific Northwest made me laugh so hard, and I do hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And yes, the new Single Track shirts for spring are out. Servus, the greeting for this podcast, is now on his shirt. Go check it out at singletrack.fm/store. And now, here is David. David, thank you for coming on the show. This is Single Track, and you calling in from the city of glass, one of the most beautiful cities I've ever visited, and I always love going back, and I haven't been back because of COVID and the border closer. Vancouver, BC, how are you? I
am well, Matthias. Thank you very much for having me.
It's fantastic. I've been following you. We just talked off air. We've been following each other on social media for many years. I don't know. I probably follow you because you're from Vancouver, and obviously you're a runner, but more so, I think I follow you because you're also a designer, which is something we're going to get into in a little bit.
Sure.
How are things up there right now?
Things are all right. The sun is shining. It's beautiful. I can't quite see the North Shore Mountains right now, but things are okay. I think there is, things are loosening up here, pandemic-wise. People are getting more comfortable about being outside. I think there's also some people that are still sounding the alarm that, hey, we're not quite out of this, but other than that, I don't know. Yeah, things are going all right up here.
One thing that last summer I was able to visit a couple countries in Europe, and it is fascinating when you travel, even just from state to state here in the US, is that every region sort of has had different rules and regulations around it. And I've mentioned it to you many, many months ago when you started your absolute crazy project, that I am fascinated that you live in a city that apparently people toss masks away, and I still haven't figured out what that is. Tell us about the project, and then we figure out if we can solve it.
So are you telling me that people don't drop masks on the ground everywhere else?
I really don't know if that's the case because I haven't figured out what the reason is. But here in Olympia, after you started your mask collecting project, and Olympia is obviously minuscule compared to Vancouver.
Right.
I've been going out and about, and I'm looking. And I mean, if I'm on a 5-mile run and I see 1 or 2 masks, that is like the most. Like, I just don't see as many as you do. And I'm trying to figure out what is this. Well, tell us about your project before we dive into the how, because we probably can't solve it anyway.
Coincidentally, we are recording this on the first anniversary of the first bag of masks that I picked up in Vancouver. So happy birthday to the world's dumbest hobby. It was, the pandemic's been tough. We hadn't had any racing for like a year this time last year, and I was getting a little antsy. We had our run club was kind of start and stop, and we'd been off pretty much all winter. And, I was just kind of needing some kind of connection. I felt like I needed to do something. We celebrated sort of frontline health workers and other people that we deemed necessary. And I'm like you said, I'm a designer. We are about as unnecessary as they come. I felt a need to do something. I needed a reason to get outside. I didn't have a race to train for. And, as a runner, I was seeing masks all around the city, and I just thought, you know what, I'm going to start picking up masks. It'll be my way of getting the city back to normal. Our case numbers were dropping. This was last March. Our case numbers were dropping, and it felt like I might be doing it for 2 months, and we'd be back to normal.
There was sort of this glimmer of hope. We didn't know about Delta yet, and you were like, "Oh, look!"
Oh no, yeah, If I had a crystal ball a year ago, would I have started doing this? I don't know, but in a strange way, it has become a game. It feels like a public service, but while I'm out there, it also feels like a game because you find masks in just all the craziest places. Anybody who's gone on one of these masking runs with me comes away going, you know what? I wouldn't have seen all of these masks, and now I see them everywhere. So it's kind of a mindset that I've gotten myself into and probably can't get myself out of. So I may be stuck doing it for years to come.
Oh boy!
But you've run every street in Olympia, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another thing I assume we'll talk about at some point.
Yes.
This has that same kind of addictive feeling, except that I go and I run a street. If you're trying to run every single street in your city, which a lot of people do, that was sort of the thing a couple of years ago, people getting into doing, once you've done a street, you're done. Well, not so with mask collecting. So I'd be out there. The next day, I'd be on the same street, and there's more masks. So, it was kind of the frustrating version of doing every single street.
Exactly.
And I was trying to cover as many streets in Vancouver as I could. I actually posted my latest heat map on social media last night after I decided, okay, it's been a year. Let's update the people, all the fans who love dirty mask collecting.
When you started, did you immediately bring tongs in a bag? Like, was that something where you started running and you realized, oh, you know what, I probably need to start collecting masks. How do I do it? Or did you how did you get into this?
Oh, so garbage is a problem in this city. It's a problem in most big cities. I think a lot of people just assume someone else is going to deal with it or whatever. The wind will blow it into someone else's yard. And I was out for a walk. I walked by a friend's place, and I noticed his kid was out picking up garbage on his street. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Good for him. And they told me about the city has this Adopt a Block program. I'm sure a lot of cities have it, but so Vancouver has this Adopt a Block program where you sign up and they give you a bunch of gear, and you get to be whatever the patron of your block, and you clean up garbage periodically, and record how much you cleaned up and whatever. Anyway, so I went home. They told me about this. I went home, signed up. I'm like, cool. And in amongst the stuff they give you one of those sort of long garbage pickers. If you've ever seen somebody picking up trash, they've got these things. But they also have this crappy little pair of salad tongs. And I thought, what the hell am I going to do with those? And when I decided, okay, I need something I can kind of tuck in a pocket so people don't see me out there, walking around with this 3-foot long trigger picker thing. I imagine myself, in an orange jumpsuit, chained to other inmates, cleaning the city with these things. So I took one of these in a small plastic bag with me, and I went out with these salad tongs. And I'm like, these are light enough. I could probably run with these. And that was basically the start of it, was adopting my own block. I live on a very short street, and I felt the need to expand my territory.
I mean, amazing. And you have to tell people, for people who don't follow you, you've done this now for a year. We're just talking anniversary. And you've collected how many masks since?
I cracked 34,500 masks yesterday.
This is absolutely mind-blowing to me. Did you break it down? How masks per mile or so? I mean, this must be possible.
Yeah. Okay.
Come on, I know you're a data guy. You would do that.
I know, and I've noticed on your podcasts you always have to mention spreadsheets.
You see?
I have kept a spreadsheet. Initially, I was just curious, and then a while into it, there was an archaeologist who was studying pandemic waste at Capilano University who started following me, and all of a sudden it was like, okay, I'm doing this for science now. So I felt, more obliged to keep better notes and really track these things. So yes, I have covered basically about 4,200 kilometers in that year, both running and walking, and it works out to a bit over 8 masks per kilometer, which for the American folks, what is that?
0.7 miles or something like that. I'm not American. I wouldn't know either.
Yeah.
I can't do the conversion in my head either. No, but so that's good. I think this is good. So we have 8 masks per kilometer.
That's the average. I have had some runs where they basically stop being runs, and I'm picking up over 20 masks a kilometer, which is like just crazy.
Yeah. So 1.6 kilometers is in a mile. So we're saying, 12 masks or something like that. So per mile. So it would be interesting. And I'm going to give now a challenge to my listeners because number one, you're doing an incredible public service. And I think that is worth for anybody to participate in some form or another in. But the thing that I've been still puzzled by is that perhaps I'm blind, and that's why I want to see. Because I just don't believe we have that many masks here. And it could be that it's really just the density of the city, right? That I run through neighborhoods where it's single-family homes, and you've got people driving, and they're not throwing masks out the window. So where would the masks really come from? But I would love to know from people if they going out on a run after they listen to this podcast, and if they should keep their eyes out and see if this is if how many masks they're finding per mile. I think we need to get a little bit of data from other parts of the world to see what this is, because the numbers, perhaps I misunderstood how many miles you run, because when you break it down per mile, it doesn't seem so much, but you always post the bag and there's so many masks in there, and I'm like, dude, this is insane. But perhaps you're just covering a lot of ground too.
Yeah. So just to give a little hint to people who may be looking for them, or places to avoid. So Vancouver's a fairly dense city, and I find most of my masks along parked cars. So people getting in and out of cars, they're dropping masks. So right along like the edge of the curb, I find the vast majority of masks. Also places where, if there's a mask mandate, like we have on our buses and stuff. So there's a lot of masks. If somebody gets off a bus or off the SkyTrain here, often they'll take their mask off, and whether they're deliberately dropping it on the ground or trying to stuff it in a pocket or something, and it falls out, I don't know. But, you find a lot there, or sort of shopping center parking lots, around schools where parents are dropping off kids who are, usually they've got their book bags, stuff flying out all over the place, and they're dropping stuff. So there's a lot of places, you think about it, you're like, okay, these are kind of obvious places you'd be finding them. But, so the parked car thing is far and away. So the thing I found about Vancouver is the denser the buildings and the parking, the greater the chance of finding masks. Like we have some neighborhoods with huge houses with like private driveways that nobody parks on, and there's far fewer masks in those neighborhoods than in most of the city.
Yeah, that makes sense. Exactly. And I think that's just something that I don't really run through, because Olympia is if there are some urban corridors, but nothing compared to Vancouver. And I run in the most residential streets, so I don't have to constantly deal with traffic lights and traffic and stuff. And so I probably just don't see it, right?
I think it also depends on, sort of the adherence to mask wearing. It's become a highly political thing. We have a lot of people here who still wear masks regularly, so there's probably just that many more masks that could potentially be dropped on the ground. I had a theory that, the kind of people, now that we've sort of lifted our mask mandates, that the kind of people who would still wear a mask would be the kinds who would, they're thoughtful enough to take care of their masks, whereas people that were forced to wear them are the kind who would probably not care or think twice after dropping a mask. So I think it just depends on where you live and that kind of thing. But And of course, this is just one kind of garbage. There is plenty of other garbage that, people could target as well that would probably save the planet.
For sure. I just love this because this is the designer brain. You come up with projects. I've always said this on the podcast. There are those people who they do have the spreadsheets, but the spreadsheets are really there to very strategically power their training. They have goals and they're going for this. And I'm not that guy either. Like, I enjoy my spreadsheet. I enjoy looking at it, but I'm not obsessing over my heart rate and my whatever else, pace, output, stride and stuff. And that seems to be something, because if you constantly have to pick up masks, I mean, your pace is crap. Right? I mean, you can't follow a strategic training goal while picking up masks.
Absolutely not. I'm currently training for a marathon, and I decided, once the year was up, I've got to squeeze in, at least 4 decent long runs before race day in May. So I'm going to leave the tongs at home on Sunday mornings on our long runs, at least temporarily, and I'll keep picking up masks, on other runs and walks. But I just, for my own sake and sanity, I think I have to do this, or I'm going to have a long day on May 1st at the Vancouver Marathon.
You're probably going to be twitching on those training runs, right? You're running down the street and you're seeing the masks and you're like, I need to pick that up.
Seriously, yeah, it is like that. A few months ago, I tried it, in one of our group runs. I was just like, okay, guys, don't let me pick up too many masks. So what I did was I would just focus. If the mask was in my direct path, I would pick it up. And, within a run or two, bang, it was like, relapsing from, an addiction. I was back to picking up every single mask and zigzagging back and forth down the streets. And, my running group was long gone, half an hour down the road ahead of me. And, I'd missed them all for post-run coffee. So that's no way to run. But I told myself I'd give it at least a year, and well, I don't know. We'll see if it evolves from here.
That's amazing. We need to finish off the mask topic, but briefly talk about the fact that I sort of jokingly commented on Instagram saying you should do something. You should turn it into an art project. There was thousands of masks. Tell us quickly what happened with some of the masks that you collected.
Right. So I think it was last May, through the magic of social media, Strava and Instagram, some runners I know who were, following my progress with this thing in the early days, said, "Hey, there's a local photographer who's looking for masks," and I was like, "Oh, okay." Yeah, she's doing an art project. So I'm like, I don't know, man. These are pretty gross.
I know.
And anyway, almost immediately, tagging each other back and forth, she got a hold of me and she says, "I'll take every mask you can give me. The dirtier, the better." And I was just like, all right. So from about late May, I must have been, I don't know how many months it was. I had probably supplied her with, initially probably 3,000 or 4,000 masks. She eventually came back and realized she needed a few more. Anyways, in the end, I've probably given her 6,000 or 7,000 masks. And currently, she has an art exhibition on at the Dal Schindel Gallery at Regent College at University of British Columbia. She takes these gorgeous photos, and she uses this really old photo finishing technique that she has to fly to Toronto to do. But as part of her display, she's got these big plexiglass boxes full of these stupid masks that I've been picking up in sort of different styles. Like the colorful cloth ones, and then there's one for black and one for the predominantly blue ones, and one for these bow tie masks that are a weird thing. I don't know if people elsewhere in the world have ever seen, who find masks on the ground have seen this, but some people go to the trouble of folding their mask, rolling it up, and tying it in a little knot. So it creates a little bow tie, and they drop them on the ground. And I have found, obviously enough to fill one of these plexiglass boxes. And she just kept asking for more because as they kind of compress, gravity brings them down. She was noticing there was a gap. And so she's putting in a specific order. And the stupid thing about this is I have been to enough places around Vancouver that I know where these bow tie people are going to drop their masks. So I'm almost like a little truffle pig going out and hunting down these truffles in the wild, and supplying her with these stupid bow ties. Sunday's run, I found 51 of these damn bow ties.
Oh my gosh.
During the run, and needless to say, I was an hour behind my group by the end of it. So, anyway, yeah. So her name is Michelle Huseman. She's a photographer, and the show apparently is on until April 10th. If anybody is in Vancouver and wants to go and look at it,
we'll link it in the show notes. Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah, she also had a quilt made out of the masks too, which was the original project she was talking about doing when she contacted me, which I don't know if you would want to sleep under a quilt made of discarded masks.
No.
It's cool to see it on the wall of this gallery.
It's very dystopian, really, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean,
it's going to take a long time for them to break down. So.
Anyway, it's true. I mean, we've been talking about supply chain issues, but I think we can still get blankets. We are not required to make quilts out of masks. We're not that far into the science fiction novel.
Let's hope not.
Oh man! All right, so this is you love crazy projects, but you are a very fast runner with a long history of running, and one of the big projects is that you love running marathons, and you've run lots of them. And those are road marathons, and me as a trail runner, I've never run more than I absolutely have to on roads. So tell me about your love for road marathons, because you also then travel. You're not just always signing up for the same one. If you can, you do them all over.
Yeah. Although I'm kind of a creature of habit. I do the same marathons multiple times, particularly the ones that are within driving distance of Vancouver. Like the Seattle Marathon in particular is conveniently located around my birthday in late November. So I have had the opportunity to run it multiple times wearing a birthday hat. So if you were one of the hundreds of runners who waved to me over the years and wished me a happy birthday during the Seattle Marathon, I hear you. I appreciate you. Hopefully we'll have a chance to do it again sometime.
Amazing.
So I've done Boston and New York, and that's about as exotic as my marathons get. I've run Vancouver, Victoria, Kelowna, Portland, the Seattle Marathon 10 times, as I mentioned, and the Rock and Roll a couple of times. So down there. So yeah, it was mostly to pack in numbers. I should also mention the Calgary Marathon and the Edmonton Marathon, which, if you want to go back in time, that was the original marathon that got me thinking, someday I want to run a marathon.
That's amazing. So what's your total number now?
I am at 52, but the big project I was trying to do was run my 50th marathon by the time I turned 50. And as I mentioned, Seattle was kind enough to schedule it on my birthday in 2018. So it was just total dumb luck that was the case. And I had a bunch of people that I run with who came down. I'm going to say I had 50 people, but I think it was probably more like 40 or so. It was a great weekend. It was it was the first year they switched from the course that I'd already run 9 times and knew like the back of my hand. So it was a very different experience, and it was a really cold day, but it was fantastic. I won't even bitch about the fact that I had been requesting for many years to have bib number 50, and they told me that I couldn't. So.
Oh. That's amazing, though. I mean, you've run plenty of trails, and we get into this a bit, but how is road marathon running different? And I mean, there are millions of ways that it's different. But describe it in two ways. Describe it and how you train for it, how you run it. Because the cities are mainly flat. I mean, the hills, road marathoners complain about the hills, but they're really not hills compared to trail running. But then also what you experience in a city is so different, right?
Yeah. One of the things I really like about road marathons, you go to a new city and you're not going to get that view of a city from a tour bus or, whatever. They're shutting the streets down for you. New York Marathon is probably the best example of that. It is such an amazing way to see the city that you would just never have the chance otherwise. And that's something that really, I really like. I don't know. There's something about the distance. Like, it's far enough that, it's an effort. You got to put in the time. And, you got to train properly, and, the other factors like, sort of pacing yourself and, hydration and all that crap. I never really got all that scientific about it. I just kind of went by feel. Like, I would, obviously take fairly copious notes about, what I was doing, and I had a rough schedule that I would try to follow, but, I didn't have a coach barking at me and I was doing things wrong or pushing things too hard. I just sort of went on feel, and I was fortunate enough to have a great group of running partners who were all we were all around the same age and around the same kind of ability, and we kind of pushed ourselves. Like this was sort of the beginning of sort of these group these sort of running groups that the professionals, like the Hansons, were like one of the first groups that kind of got together. And so we like to pretend that we were like the poor man's Hansons, the poor rapidly approaching middle-aged guy Hansons. And, that sort of group dynamic, I think was great. And, and marathons just seem like the thing to do. So, I grew up just outside of Edmonton in Alberta, and, there were no trail races. And, it wasn't really a thing until, I kind of got out here, and I was aware of trail races, but, and sort of vaguely aware of ultras. But it wasn't something that was really on my radar. I grew up, I'm a child of the 80s, the early 80s. My father one day came home and he decided he was going to start running, and I was just fascinated by these shoes that he had these New Balance 620s, and all the cool kids wore Nikes back then. But I was just fascinated by these things, and they were kind of my gateway into running. And within a year, I was running with my dad, and we started doing races. Together. And this is when I first started thinking, I'm flipping through the pages of Runner's World and stuff and learning about the sport. And I idolized guys like Bill Rogers and Alberto Salazar and Dick Beardsley. And I thought, okay, I want to run a marathon. I want to run Boston and New York someday, just like these guys. And I actually thought by the time I was 14 that I was running enough that I could run a marathon. And probably, luckily for me, the Edmonton Marathon was canceled that year. And because that 14-year-old kid was going to have a tough time, I think.
But you really got into running from the road, from the classic marathon kind of running perspective.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what it was about running. I'm not built like a runner. My parents moved that summer, and I went off to a private school where I actually got to run with guys who were real runners and realized, I'm not really a runner, or at least I'm not a distance runner. And, and I learned to play rugby, and that became my thing. And running took a back seat to other sports. Mm-hmm. And it was the thing that you did to keep in shape so it was sort of a secondary training tool for other sports. And it wasn't until many years later that I kind of came back around to it. That near miss at my first marathon when I was 14 became a crutch that I used for almost 20 years. Mm-hmm. Anytime a marathon came up in conversation, I would always say, I missed my only chance of running one back in 1983. And that's the kind of excuse that non-runners will accept. Mm-hmm. But I had a friend who was managing a running store at the time, and he said, yeah, dude, it's never too late. Mm-hmm. And, I was in my early 30s, and, I had 2 small kids, and I was starting to realize I'm not the athlete I used to be. And maybe there's something to that. I started getting in shape and started running again just for running's sake, and started thinking, maybe my buddy Anthony was right. And I signed up for a marathon clinic at the local running room store and ran my first marathon in May of 2004.
Amazing.
And that was the beginning of this.
Yeah. It is so if you live in a city like Vancouver,
yeah,
how hard is it to get to trails? How hard is it to, I've been in Vancouver many times, and you can see the mountains in the distance, and if you live in North Vancouver, then they might be easier accessible. But like, aside from like little city park loops, how hard is it to actually get to trails?
It's not hard.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So, I'm looking out the window at the North Shore right now, and we've got like mountains right across the inlet. We're separated by this large inlet, Burrard Inlet. There's 2 bridges and a sea bus you can take to get over there. I could probably be on a trail depending on traffic, in 20 minutes from where I am. We have 2 main urban parks on the Vancouver side, and one is out by UBC, the University of British Columbia, on Point Grey. It's got some great trails. And the other is Stanley Park, which, a lot of people know about. I found out the hard way that training exclusively in those parks is not the way to train for your first real trail race.
Not enough hills?
Oh, God.
Not enough single track?
Exactly. The North Shore, hopefully most of your listeners have heard about the North Shore trails. They're super technical. A lot of them, they're steep, they're rooty, they're rocky, the forest is really dense. They're often slippery. They're just gorgeous. And, they're not outside my back door, but they're outside a lot of people's back door. I know a lot of people that have lived on this side of the inlet who have moved over to the North Shore just to be closer to the mountains. And, it makes total sense. You basically, if you live high enough up in North Van, you've got 5 minutes to a trailhead, and you're in some of the most beautiful single track and technical stuff. But, if you're looking for an excuse not to do it, living on the Vancouver side, the price of gas and the traffic.
Yeah, right?
Forget it. I'm going to hit Pacific Spirit Park or Stanley Park instead.
Yeah.
But,
how many times have you done the grouse grind?
Funny you should mention that. I have never done the grouse grind.
Are you kidding me?
I am not kidding you. This is.
Is it too hyped up, too commercial, too like?
Oh, it's very hyped up.
Yeah.
But it's also one of many ways you can get up from the base of Grouse Mountain to the top. And funny thing was, and I took it as a sign from God. A friend and I got talked into participating in a relay called the Seek the Peak Relay a few years ago. it was like a 4-person team starting on the beach in West Vancouver, and you'd run up through Capilano Canyon, which is a gorgeous place to run, and then up to Grouse Mountain. One of the legs was just the grind. Somebody would run the grind, and then from the top, the last runner would run up. There's like a service road that would take you up to the peak of Grouse Mountain, and then you'd turn around and come bombing back down again, and finish at the sort of the chalet on top of Grouse Mountain, where the gondola exits. And I was a pretty good climber then. I wasn't a stair climber, and I had never been on the grind, but the guy who had put the team together was like, "Oh yeah, you can do the grind." And I'm like, "I've never done the grind." And so my buddy Tim, who had done the grind many times, Tim has gone on to become like the king of the grouse grind. The guy's 61 years old, and he's still doing multiple grinds a day and other ways up. And he does them year round, even though technically, those trails are supposed to be closed in the winter. But anyway, he decided, okay, well, I got to take you out there and do the grind once before race day, because we had we had 4 days before the race. And I just needed to see what it was like. Anyway, we were partway up the grind, and there was a sign that said it was closed because of an avalanche, or not an avalanche, but a slight rock slide that blocked the course. And so we ended up taking a different route up. There's the BCMC trail, the BC Mountaineering Club trail, that is slightly longer and less steep. And it's not the gross grind, so it doesn't get the same traffic. Anyway, Tim took me up the BCMC instead, and he absolutely kicked my ass in the last quarter of it. I got to the top, and I said, "Tim, you're doing the grind." And that was as close to the grind as I got. I got to be the anchor leg, which was kind of cool. I managed to catch the lead solo runner at the top of this climb, and the guy blew past me on the way down because he was a much better downhiller. And our team won, and I think we had the team course record for a few years, but I was second place to this guy who had done the entire race by himself.
That's amazing.
So
and
that's
for
the closest I've been to the grouse grind.
That's amazing. And for people who don't know the grouse grind, it's a one-way uphill trail with lots of stairs and super steep. And you can buy. Do you have to buy a special ticket or something in order to be on the leaderboard? I guess, right? But you can take the gondola down, right?
Yeah, it costs money to take the gondola down. So, but you could do the grind up and then take BCMC. You can't go down the grind because of the popularity, but you could take any one of the other trails down if you really wanted to. Yeah. So, and
there's like an electronic tracker if you want like an annual pass, and you can be on a leaderboard and stuff. It's a super cool project that for me as somebody from the outside, I absolutely love it. And you're a typical local who said, "I've never done this."
Yes, but the flip side of me is my friend Tim Weens, who was the guy who got me in. The guy who first got me into ultras. He is like the king, so you'll always see his name on the leaderboard. That's amazing at the grouse grind.
And then you mentioned the BCMC, and that's the trail that Gary Robbins trained on a few years ago, dozens of times in preparation for Barkley. I remember him endlessly talking about BCMC in the most brutal winter conditions. Amazing trails out there.
The videos are still out there.
Oh yeah, no, for sure, exactly. All right, so you live in Vancouver, you've run a few marathons, now you're transitioning into trails. Give us a couple of highlights of some of your big trail races.
Oh my God, how many highlights do you want? I've got lots.
Well, let's just talk about the only important one, which is Western States. We've been joking beforehand that we should mention Western States so you get a street cred, and I was waving it off because I'm like, Western States.
I have finished it twice.
Nice.
And in 2011 and 2012, Gary Robbins said, "You lucky MFer, you're the only guy I know who's ever gotten into the lottery 2 years in a row."
Yeah, exactly.
This was back when it was slightly easier to get into, but it was still pretty tough. And I felt like I was in great shape the first year, and not quite that shape the second year, and the last 20 miles or whatever was a little bit of a struggle for me. But I just kept telling myself, you got to get that silver buckle. You got to get that silver buckle. I have 2 daughters, and I didn't want them fighting over. I wanted them to each have a buckle after I die, so that they wouldn't be fighting over one. So that's what kept me going.
I mean, they should get their own buckles, right? I mean,
Yes.
now handing things down, it's not really cool.
Exactly. I'm thinking about that in retrospect. This is just what was in my head at
For
the time.
sure.
It just kept me going. But yeah. In retrospect, it's like, screw those. You can cremate those with me. So anyway,
You sell them on eBay.
pry them from my cold dead hands.
There we go. Amazing.
But as for the ultras, anyway, maybe a little sort of background to how I got into ultras. So like we said, marathon was king when I first started running, and I was very vaguely aware of these odd cults who ran crazy longer distances. I don't think it was nowhere near as popular then as it was now. It was kind of I don't want to say an old man's thing, but you certainly didn't see guys coming out of college and wanting to race ultras because, they could make money at shorter distances and not kill themselves. And there's been a real shift, I think, in sort of the last 10 years or so. But anyway, it wasn't something, I was aware of these longer distances, but it wasn't something normal people did.
You didn't have a long enough beard for it?
Yeah, basically.
Right?
Yeah. I did have short enough shorts, but I didn't have the long enough beard. Anyway, I recall picking up a race calendar and seeing at the top of it, BC Athletics used to publish these guides. You would see at every race where they have every race in the Lower Mainland listed. And at the top of the list was January 1st, Club Fat Ass, New Year's Day 50K. And I assumed it was a typo. Really, running 50K is one thing, but to do it on New Year's Day and for it to be hosted by a group who call themselves fat asses, it was an obvious typo. But, I eventually discovered it wasn't a typo and that ultra marathoning was a thing. And then I met an actual ultra marathoner, my friend Tim. And, I heard about a race in California called Western States and loved the idea of getting a belt buckle for running 100 miles. I thought that seemed super cool. Marathon medals were cool, but a big silver belt buckle, man, come on. So I did the math.
Yeah.
I did the math, and I thought, okay, I was running sub 3 marathons. So, 3 hours multiplied by 4. And I was like, that's only 12 hours. And I thought, even accounting for running a slower pace, it seemed totally doable. And then I read Dean Karnazes' book, Ultra Marathon Man, and realized 2 important facts. First being that Western States wasn't run along some sleepy Southern California beach highway, but in the Sierra Mountains in Northern California, and that there's this formidable obstacle that happens every 24 hours, nighttime. And I thought the idea of running in the dark for hours out in the middle of nowhere just did not appeal to me. So I was just like, forget that. But, I eventually kind of came around to it. I got talked into my first real trail race in 2005 that I mentioned, being woefully underprepared for. I vowed I would never run another race. And that one was only 25K. It took a little while, but I started thinking, maybe it's time again. My little running group got together and we decided, hey, let's sign up for our first ultra. We have a race here called the Neenacker. It's been going since 1989. It's like the granddaddy of all sort of Vancouver area ultras. It basically spans the entire North Shore from the far side of West Van to the far side of North Van. It's actually kind of cool. If you're looking north from Vancouver, you can basically see the entire course right in front of you, from where the mountains come up out of the water on the west side to where they drop back into the water on the east side. And so we decided, okay, let's sign up for this thing. We can train together. It was a scary concept to do it by myself, but having guys that wanted to go, guys, more importantly, guys who had access to better access to vehicles than I did, because I was sharing the car with my wife, and I was also paranoid about whether I'd be able to drive after some of these runs. So we signed up for the Neenacker. We got through it. A couple of the guys decided they were never running trails again. And, that was kind of it. I was like, I don't think I'm going to do this. And I basically, that was my retirement from ultra running until a few years later. My friend Tim convinced me to come out and run this club fat ass New Year's Day 50K. The course follows roads and urban trails from Stanley Park to Pacific Spirit Park. I'd run these all like dozens of times, and it just seemed like the perfect thing for me. I was running so many marathons that I just felt I needed a little extra challenge. And to do something like this, and it's kind of informal, but it was still fairly competitive back then, that it just seemed like the perfect thing. So we signed up. Normally it would be a super runnable course, but we had snow that year. So we had everything from ice to slush. And it was my first time racing with Gary Robbins and Ryan Melcher, who were the local pros who were racing for Montreal, Canada at the time. And Ellie Greenwood, who was still a couple of years away from becoming the Ellie Greenwood. So it was, it was a pretty cool experience. And it showed me that, not every ultra is like, the Neenacker.
Yeah. And so the distance was exciting because you've come from the road.
Yeah.
But the trails were challenging because you couldn't go fast enough. You didn't have the technical skills. What do you feel like was missing?
I definitely didn't have the technical skills at first, for sure. But I think, that was a good stepping stone into the world of ultras. And I was totally hooked. And, and I was like, okay, man, I gotta do some more races. And Tim said, hey, let's do Chuckanut. And Chuckanut was my first international ultra. And it was, that was a different experience too. But again, there's that runnable first stretch and finishing stretch that makes it perfect. I tell people, you know what, if you're going to do a trail 50, do Chuckanut, because it's basically 2 flat 10Ks with a 30K trail race, a gnarly 30K trail race in between. So, it was like a perfect way to transition from road to trail. I would love to tell you about my first Chuckanut experience.
Okay.
So it was the best of times and the worst of times. So Chuckanut, as anybody who's been to Chuckanut knows, is kind of like going to one of those pro sports fantasy camps. The race attracted like just all the rock stars of the sport, it seemed. Particularly the ones in the western half of the continent. And this was 2009. And I knew Scott Jurek sometimes showed up, and, Scott was still living in Seattle, and, I was, a big fan. Anyway, he was a few years removed from his 7 Western States wins, but, he was still Scott Jurek. Anyway, I was checking the entrance list, and Scott wasn't on it, but, I think he had just done some multi-day race in Central America and was battling tendonitis or something. So, but I was like, okay, whatever. That's not what this is about. Anyway, so Tim and I drove down from Vancouver to Bellingham on the morning of the race. We lined up in the old clubhouse that you used to have to pick up your race package from on race day. And we were standing there in line, and all of a sudden I sensed this tall presence behind me. I turned around, partly because the ceiling in that old clubhouse was kind of low and the lighting was crappy. And all of a sudden I was in shadow. And I turned around, and it was Scott Jurek, just like standing in line behind me. And I was like, oh, I kind of gagged a little. I was like, yeah, I didn't think you were racing. And he graciously replied, well, if they let me, otherwise I'll volunteer. I'm like, okay, really? It's Scott Jurek. You're going to turn him away? Anyway, so that was that. I just sort of, didn't want to bug him. A few minutes later, I went looking for the porta potty line. And I found a trio of porta potties and only 2 people in line. And I was doing a little dance, I don't know, how old was I at that point? Was over 40. So, you want your porta potty time before races. And when my turn came, the porta potty door opened up and it was Scott Jurek. And I was like, pardon the pun, but you got to be shitting me. I get to use the same porta potty as Scott Jurek. Anyway, I don't know. Maybe it's embarrassing, but anyway. So early in the race, I found myself running with my friend Mike Palachuk. We were just cruising along that flat interurban section, shooting the shit and watching the lead pack get smaller and smaller in the distance. And a couple of K from the beginning of the first climb up to Fragrance Lake, we spotted a runner in a mostly white singlet who'd been dropped by the pack. And as the gap between us closed, Mike and I realized it was Scott. So we gradually closed the gap and caught Scott just as the first climb began. We made brief small talk, and by the time we reached the first switchbacks, Mike started to drop off the back, and I felt comfortable, almost like I could have gone faster up the climb. But it's not every day you get to race with Scott Jurek, so I gave him a little room and just sat back and studied the master. He was so close at switchbacks, I could have reached up and grabbed his ankle to check out his new Cascadias.
Amazing.
Which would have made for a funny headline. Man DQ'd for tripping 7-time Western States champion Scott Jurek. Anyway, I as we climbed, I just watched him and all the things he was doing. Like, he had some kind of custom waist pack or something. He was constantly eating and stuff. And, and I was watching, sort of the way he was approaching everything. Of course, this means I was ignoring myself and not really paying attention to what I was doing. So anyway, I had done a bit of recon on the course with Tim prior to the race. And, I kind of knew what was ahead. I also knew where Glenn Tachiyama and the other photographers usually set up for those iconic Chuckanut shots of runners barreling down from Fragrance Lake to Cleator Road. So when we reached Fragrance Lake and I was still on Scott's heel, I started thinking, oh man, how cool would that be to get in race photos just behind Scott Jurek? So sticking close to Scott down to Cleator Road became my first priority. So once we leveled out at Fragrance Lake, Scott started to pick up the pace, and at one point he leapt up on this sort of rocky, this rock face, and of course Scott's legs are up to my chin, so he leapt up there like a gazelle, and I went to leap up, and bang, I tripped. And I was like, oh, mother effer. Anyway, so I got up and I'm just thinking, oh, I've lost my chance. I just started to chase after Scott. And every so often I could see him a turn or two ahead. And I was really bummed about it. I really wanted to stick close to him. I thought, later in the race along the ridge section, because, as we've gone over, I'm a road runner. I come from a road background, and, I can't run technical for shit. And I thought that would be so awesome to sort of follow along. almost like those old dance cards where they show you where to put your foot.
Yeah.
But it was like, so I thought, okay, I'm going to try and keep him in sight. Of course, he had crew waiting for him at the Cleator Road aid station, and he just blew right through. And I was starting to think, okay, well, I should probably eat something. And, one of the volunteers handed me this plate of, and it was like piled high with unwrapped shot blocks, for all you pre-pandemic people who remember when we used to do these things. And so I just looked at them and I was like, what am I supposed to do with these? And they're like, well, take one. And so I just grabbed a handful and stuffed them in my mouth and went after Scott. And that's when everything started to go sideways for me. My stomach started to go and the wheels really fell off. I just felt super bloated. And I would spend most of the rest of the race stopping, doubled over at the side of the trail, hoping to clear whatever it was that made my stomach feel like a beach ball. I didn't really care which end it came out of. I just needed something to relieve the pressure. And that was basically the next couple of hours of my race.
Man.
And Scott was long gone by then. I eventually managed to get something out and drag my ass in under 5 hours, which actually feels like a pretty damn big accomplishment, but it definitely wasn't the day I'd hoped for. On the plus side, there was one photo of me. I believe the photographer's name was Garrett Grove, and it's a great close-up shot of Scott, and I'm this tiny little blur just coming out of the trees in the background. And so, it wasn't all bad. And, at the very least, it kind of lit a fire under me. I wanted to go back, and I think I went back 3 more times after that and had much better days out there. So
that is amazing.
Chuckanut is a great one. I know you guys talk about it all the time, and you don't need another, salesperson to hit that point home. But kids, do Chuckanut.
No, absolutely. I mean, for me as somebody who is into trail running for the most technical possible trails, I certainly was taken back by Chuckanut. I was underprepared in dealing with the sort of challenge of the flatness of the interurban trail out and back. But the race itself is absolutely incredible for sure.
It took me, I think it took me 3 tries before I had just the right kind of pacing in that middle section dialed in, that I wasn't struggling on the interurban on the way back. Because, it's the interurban on the way back. If you've mistimed or mishandled your race, it's just carnage. And I was running with, I think it was Jack Doniak. He's another runner from Vancouver I'm going to say it was the 2011 Chuckanut. And we were just flying down the interurban on the way back. It was such an awesome experience. Being on the other side, not being that guy who's struggling to I'm trying to release a cramp leaning against a tree by the side of the trail. So if you can time it right, it's a thing of beauty. It took me obviously 3 times. And, just to double back, I think the source of my problem was a big rookie mistake. Gary Robbins at the time was using this stuff called CarboPro, and it came in a concentrated syrup. And that's what I used in my bottles. And you're supposed to dilute it I don't know what, 10 to 1 or something. But I thought, it's going to be a long day, and I'll be refilling my bottles at every aid station, so that mixture is going to get diluted. Oh boy! So I think I had it a 1 to 1 or a 2 to 1, and it was way too much for my stomach to overload or to handle. So kids, don't do that.
It is. Dialing nutrition is an interesting challenge for sure, and that is certainly not the way to do it.
and I feel bad because it took me a while to figure that out, and I thought it was I don't know if Chrissy still makes a big deal about this, but I remember prior to that first Chuckanut, she raved about her mother's peanut butter and jelly wraps. She just does peanut butter and jelly in a tortilla. And I was like, okay, well, I want the full Chuckanut experience. So the very first aid station, right before the Fragrance Lake climb, I grabbed one of these things and wolfed it down. And for I think 2 weeks, I thought it was the peanut butter and jelly that messed me up. And I feel bad. I apologize, Chrissy, to your mother for thinking that it was her peanut butter and jelly wraps.
It's funny that you mentioned it. I think peanut butter jelly wraps was the first time I had them the first time at Chuckanut too.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. I remember being pretty beat down because my Chuckanut was super bad weather, and I felt really beat down coming just to the aid station just below the chin scraper. Yeah. And they had bacon there, bacon and avocado, and it was amazing. Like they had a super nice atmosphere, and it totally revived me. Yeah. It was absolutely incredible because I knew, I had never run these trails before, but obviously, the infamous chin scraper, everybody knows about it. So I was preparing myself for it, and I was so beat down because I was so early in my running. I didn't have good gear yet, and it was just, March, right? I mean, it was just sort of this super cold, rainy weather. And so I was really beat down. And I come to this aid station, and they are in crazy high spirit atmosphere, and they have bacon, and I was totally like, okay, I'm gonna finish this thing. It was a total lifesaver at that moment. I will never forget that aid station.
Yeah. Oh, you're gonna give me bacon? Oh, I'll sign me up. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. That was for me. It was more important, but it matches the experience to the infamous, and I don't know what the aid station is called in Squamish. The one with like 10 kilometers out, where the guys always dress up in crazy outfits.
It was Powerhouse at one point. I don't know if that's what they call it now. It's Farside.
Might
also be
Farside.
Called.
Yeah. It has its own Twitter feed.
Yeah.
The aid station with its own Twitter feed. Exactly. Farside. Yeah. And they serve beer and bourbon out there, or Fireball or something, and having a few sips of beer out there. I remember coming on my 50-miler, I think, out there to that aid station, and this woman next to me asks for beer, and she obviously doesn't need the whole can, right? So she pours herself a little bit, and I look over and I'm like, can I have the rest of this? This sounds absolutely amazing.
Nice. Yes. I guess we'll have to talk about Squamish.
We should talk about Squamish, but to ease us in, I want to completely jump out and talk a little bit about your design work, because there's an obvious connection there, because you don't just design, you design not predominant. Tell me, I don't actually quite know. Are you working for, or are you your own design company? Talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, I'm on my own now. I got started. A friend of mine from university he'd started a small company working out of another guy's living room. And this was the mid to late 90s. And they were designing rave flyers and club flyers. And at the time I was just doing illustration. And they had a couple of jobs they needed to do, and and I was kind of fascinated. I've always been fascinated by design, and I love designing logos and stuff like that. So I hooked up with them, and together we had a design company for like 16, 17 years. And our big thing was designing rave flyers, initially anyway. And man, some of them, if you went to a rave in Vancouver or Toronto or Seattle anytime in the late 90s to early 2000s, you may have seen one of our flyers. And that was kind of how I got my start doing that. There's nothing like doing artwork for a bunch of kids in baggy pants who show up with envelopes of cash. But that's a whole other story. A topic for another day.
Amazing.
But anyway, so we eventually kind of parted ways, and it was sometime around running these Club Fat Ass New Year's Day runs and getting to know Gary Robbins, that he approached me about some small projects he was working on. He had this thing where he was running the West Coast Trail and the East Coast Trail, and he wanted a little bit of branding for it. And finally, he was like, you know what? The old race that used to be in Squamish, the Stormy 50, which also included a 100 miler that I think Gary still holds the course record for, because they only had it for 2 years. It had gone under after the 2010 race, and they had a hole in the calendar, and Gary, was quite fond of the race, and he wanted to bring it back. So he approached me in 2012, said, "Hey, we're bringing Stormy back. We're going to call it the Squamish 50. And, I'm just curious if you're interested in designing the logo for it." So that began, a series of ongoing projects, designing race logos and merch and everything else under the sun for Gary and Jeff Langford, for all their races.
For me, as a fellow designer, highest praise. I love your work. I love the I love the consistency. I love the professionalism while still, not being completely corporate. It has a really
that big Solomon logo in the middle of it.
Well, yeah, sure, but I mean, what, that brings Gary a lot of money. So I mean, I get that that needs to be in. But what I'm, like, there's a corporate branding that that feels just sort of too slick, too safe, too clean, right? And I mean, when I got into trail running as a designer, and I've said this many times to many people, and many of them look at me like I'm crazy. I mean, a good website and a good logo, that is something that I pay attention to. That's the reason why I want to run a race. If I look at two different races and say, here's a race that, they more or less have the same profile, the same idea, then the ones that's better designed is something that I care about. And I mean, that might be superficial, that might not even be the correct approach. And it certainly has limits, because if you can then get overly corporate, then, it might not be something that attracts me either. But it still, it feels really well done, and everything that you continue to release fits that profile. And so it's really cool.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And you are bang on. That's exactly how everybody should pick a race.
Yeah, I mean, I think, no, I know that I talk to people and they pick a race exactly opposite, right? I mean, they say, if there's no website and if it's only word of mouth and if sort of feels under the radar, then that's the kind of race that I want to run. And
I mean, I kind of see that, but
I think it has an appeal too. But for me personally, I like when I get the information, if I feel like if there is attention brought to these matters, and I feel like I'm cared for when I go down and run the race. Right?
Yeah. And I love designing the swag and and everything else. I've been through the mask thing. I've sort of been in contact or brief contact with a group in the UK called Trash Free Trails, and I've been sort of looking at some of their stuff. And there's a real movement away from swag of any kind, because it's just unnecessary. Sort of a lot of it ends up in the garbage or whatever. But I don't know. I still love a bit of cool race swag. And, I don't know. Obviously I'm biased because I design this stuff, but, I don't know. I'd kind of miss it if, there were races that, had like nothing but a time and a website. But
it is challenging for somebody like me who's trying to be a little bit of a race director, and my races are very small. The economics in getting good swag doesn't plan out, right?
Right, exactly.
And so and that's part of the reason why I like running bigger races, because then the swag is worthwhile. But in reality, there is very little swag that I've gotten that might have delighted me in the moment, but that I'm still wearing and using, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so I get, like, I like if it's an add-on, right? Like for somebody who says, look, this was a really big achievement. Like, I want to come back and do Squamish 50/50 because I need one of those damn hats, right? I mean, no, I mean, if it's something that's truly special, then it's worth it, right? But sort of this automated, here's an entire bag full of stuff, right? I think, and a lot does end up in the landfill and is sort of worthless, right?
Oh, and a lot of, like, at least in the past, like, road marathons are probably the worst for that because they require so much sponsorship. You'd get these bags at your package pickup and just full of stuff that ends up in the hotel room garbage or recycling bin, which is really unfortunate. So, and I got to say too, a lot of that unnecessary stuff. As much as I like getting medals, I got shoe boxes full of them, especially 52 marathon medals, and they just very rarely see the light of day. Maybe I should have done something better with them, but part of me kind of thinks about that too, especially the guy who picks up garbage off the street for fun. It is a concern of mine, and I don't want to sound like a hypocrite saying, hey, get all the swag you can while don't drop crap on the ground. But anyway,
I think that there's, I mean, as a designer, I think that that's the interesting challenge, right? Coming up with something that's truly unique and speaks to the particular race. I think it was like 5 years ago or so when the CNC or laser cutting machines became affordable, and so all of a sudden every race, right? The first couple of races, it was really cool that you got these wooden medals. Right. And I remember seeing them and I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta do a race where I can get one of those wooden medals. And then all of a sudden, literally every race handed out wooden medals, and it became sort of a like, okay, we've seen it, we've done it. And I remember actually getting one, and I looked at the finished quality and I was like, oh, seeing them up close, it's still just a medal. It's not that cool. So I think that sold a lot better on Instagram than in real.
Yeah.
Well, amazing. So you, what other work do you do it? I mean, I don't think Gary can't launch new races fast enough to keep you occupied full time.
Oh, don't be so sure about that. Like the pandemic, it was like, oh my God, I think we were in the middle of sort of finalizing stuff for Diaz Vista. And when everything started shutting down, and I was just like, "Oh my God, what are we gonna do?" That's a pretty good chunk of the work I do. I was like, "What am I gonna do?" And then Gary came up with I'm assuming Jeff had something to do with it. Gary and Jeff came up with these ideas of these virtual races, and all of a sudden it was like, "Oh yeah, so we're doing this scavenger hunt." And we want this and this and this. And,
we need 30 logos.
Yeah, that was basically what it was. Yeah. It was like, we want to do these little buttons. And then the number kept changing. I was like, oh, dude, can you stop? Anyway, it was an awesome challenge considering like I was basically, we're all like staying indoors and not doing anything. And I had this great mental challenge of trying to come up with these designs for all these different challenges that Gary had. And then it was so well received. It's like, let's do it again. And so we ended up, I think we had like 4 of them. There was the summer, and there was the spring or winter or fall, or I can't remember now. Anyway, there was a bunch of them. And, it's like, really, Gary? You don't want to do all the same challenges? Those files are already done.
We could just give it a different color scheme for the season or something.
We want to do all new challenges, and I'm just like, oh God. But yeah, some of them. By the time the scavenger hunt kind of wrapped back around the clock, there were a few repeat challenges that that I was able to kind of tweak some colors and kind of go with that. But anyway, yeah, it was so. It definitely, here I was thinking that the pandemic was going to slow everything down so much that I wasn't going to get any work done or have any work to do. And it turned into it felt like a full-time job, way more than all the other years that I'd been doing stuff for them. So, but anyway, they're a large part of what I do. I've got, a few other clients in tech and film and TV production and stuff like that. So, but they're the fun ones.
They're the fun ones. Amazing.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right.
Especially when Gary gets on these tangents and comes up with some crazy thing. So check out their new race, Conquer the Veterans.
I know.
Race in Chilliwack.
And I love the idea of it. It's just hard from a traveling point of view. Right. I mean, I thought about, trying to haul all that gear up. I was like, ugh, that seems.
Yeah, it is. It is definitely a unique concept, but it has. I think it encapsulates the kind of lifestyle that Gary lives now that he lives in Chilliwack.
Yes.
He's gotten big into the stand-up paddling. He's gotten big into gravel bike racing, and then obviously the trail running. So having a multi-sport event that includes all three is kind of like the Gary thing. So it'll be interesting.
For sure, it will be exciting to see how this race unfolds. So you design all these amazing race logos and the swag around it. And obviously the marquee race in all of this, at least for the time being, because I think Wham has huge potential. But for the time being, it is Squamish. Squamish is
definitely
probably in numbers, participants. I think I read somewhere definitely Canada's largest trail race festival, right? When you when you combine
the different distances.
Exactly.
I know there was whatever it was called, Run for the Toad or something in Ontario that had pretty big numbers too. But I think Squamish has got to be up there.
Mm-hmm. And do you know if the numbers are limited based on permits? Is that one of the issues?
I think so. Yeah, because I know that they kind of juggle, especially because they have the 50 miler, the 50K, and then the combination 50-50 of both races. And then in addition to the 23, and the kids run.
And the kids run, exactly. So how many times have you run it?
Oh, geez, I should know this.
If it's too many to count, then that's the number.
I wish it was too many to count. I'm gonna say 4, including the 50-50. So that kind of counts as 2. So maybe 5 if you count them separately. But so I ran the first one, which was great because after I'd kind of blown up after Stormy 2 years earlier, I kind of felt like I had unfinished business in Squamish, and so I was kind of excited about Gary bringing back a version of Stormy in the form of the Squamish 50. But I had just run Western States for the second time, like a month and a half earlier, and I was really kind of having a bit of a struggle mentally. And I was cooked. I was ready to pack it in. I started thinking of dropping out at halfway, but I was visited by the ghosts of ultra running past, present, and future on my way to what at the time was the halfway point at Quest University. I think you encounter it earlier in the race or later in the race now, but anyway, it was basically the halfway point. And I had 3 guys. First one I was running with this Kiwi named Chris Price down to Quest, and we were just chatting about stuff, and it kind of helped me get my head back in the game. And he left me with this, he said, just go out for the next loop. At the time, that first year, you did a loop after Quest, which then brought you back to Quest again. And, now you leave Quest and you don't come back. You just keep going off in the woods. But at the time there was this loop, and he just said, you know what, start that loop. The worst thing that could happen is you're back at Quest again, and then you can drop out. And I thought, that's sensible advice. I'll give it a thought. And then he kind of took off on me. And as I was rolling into Quest, I saw Ryan Melcher there, and he was super excited to see me for whatever reason. He was just welcoming people to the aid station, which was kind of neat. He was kind of a big deal at the time. He represented Canada at World Ultra races and stuff. And, he was a good guy. And he just started hooting and hollering, and he may have been doing, I may be hallucinating, but he may have been doing a striptease or something weird. But anyway, it made me feel a whole lot better. And then, while I was in the aid station, sort of getting my shit back together, a friend of mine, Michael Stockdale, he was just there to cheer people on, and he was a lot of comfort for me. He accompanied me basically back to the next trailhead up that road after Quest back into the forest again. And, I was just like, yeah, you know what? I gotta finish this for him. And, at the very least. And you know what? But at the end of that first loop, I was feeling pretty good. I was feeling reinvigorated, and I had a great finish. And the best part about it was that final 10K was roughly the same as on the Squamish 50. It was roughly the same as the old Stormy final 10K. And 2 years earlier, I had just blown up. I was cramping and having a terrible time. I dropped off the podium and ended up finishing fourth. And this time I felt so good, and I had such a strong finish, and I couldn't help thinking, you know what? If I had dropped out at Quest, I would have missed out on this. And it was such a magical experience for me. I was like, this was the finish that I'd hoped to have 2 years earlier. So I thought, you know what? I got to come back and put both halves of those races together and have a real cracker of a race. But I still have yet to do that. So anyway, that was that first, the first Squamish 50 miler in 2012. Gary's since changed the course a lot. Like, that Debex Hill that you have to go up in the 50 miler. Mm-hmm. We used to go up in the opposite direction. So you'd go up that crappy gravel road, and then you'd go bombing down the super steep stuff, which just seemed like insane to me. I could slide it down faster on my butt if I wouldn't, end up with roots up my wazoo. But anyway, anyway, it was a cool experience. I think I might have done the 50K next after that. I might have thought, okay, 50 miles is too much of that crap for me, but
it is super tough. It is a super tough race. It was my first 50K, and then I did the 50 miler the following year, and I really, really struggled on the 50 miler. But to the point where I was like, okay, I'm done with it and I need to do something else. But it's been a couple years, and I'm very much eyeing the 50-50 just because it's such a unique concept of a race. And I feel like since I've know the trails, it would be worth it to try to do something crazy like that on trails that I've done before. Yeah,
and if you don't know the trails, you will know them by the second day because it's the same thing. You do the 50 miles, and then you do a lot of the same stuff again in the 50 miler.
But so I feel like there's also a big chance that if you don't know the trails and you do the 50 miler, you don't wake up for the second day to do the 50K.
That absolutely happens a lot. And Gary usually asks people at the finish line, so what's your alarm set for tomorrow or whatever?
Yeah.
Some people are saying, I'll be sleeping in or whatever. But yeah, I was kind of skeptical. I remember when they first mentioned, hey, we're thinking of combining the two. And I was like, nobody's going to want to do that. But that's the first event that sells out every year.
Yeah.
Is the 50-50.
Yeah.
And at the time I just thought it was insane. Like even running a road marathon, I can't get up the next day. I'm not functional. Mm-hmm. And the idea of running a really tough 50 miler and then getting up the next day, the one thing if the whole thing was in one go, but having enough time to like stiffen up and everything else overnight is like, oh man, I don't know if I can do that. That's crazy. But all the cool kids were doing it, so it's like the effects of peer pressure. And the part of the problem for me was So I these two friends, Michael Stockdale, who's the guy that kind of nursed me back to sanity on the third leg of the Three Ghosts there in 2012. He and another friend, Alan Yu, decided we would run the 50-50 in 2019. And of course, I was 50 at the time. So it just, all the 50s just made sense.
No, you had to, obviously.
So it was like, yeah, I had no choice. And, I was always getting pressure from Jeff and Gary about, hey, when are you going to run the 50-50? And I'd always laugh at them, like, why the hell would I want to do that? But I thought, you know what, I'm definitely not getting any younger. So if I'm ever going to do it, I might as well do it. I just finished my 50 marathons. And, why the hell not? Let's try this thing and see. And I thought at the very least, I could get up the next day and maybe walk it in.
Yeah.
But, it was an amazing experience. The first day of it, we decided, okay, we're all going to run together. And my friend Michael is just a fearless downhiller. I hadn't done any serious trail running in a couple of years, so he pulled away on every descent. But he was such a good guy about it. He would just like wait at the next aid station for us, and then we just sort of rejoined. So we were almost like this like slinky or accordion, where he'd kind of lead the way down these hills, and it wasn't a long wait, but it was enough that if he really wanted to, he probably could have finished an hour ahead of us if he wanted to, but. I think he kind of liked the experience of the three of us sort of running together. And so that, that was kind of, good as well. But, anyway, we crossed the line together on the first day, relatively unscathed. Alan and I were attacked by wasps or murder hornets or something on one of the descents. But other than that, we were still standing. But, I was kind of nervous about, what a 50-year-old body was going to do overnight. And, but yeah, like I said, I even if we have to walk it in, but it turned out to be way better than I expected. I even avoided getting stung in that same spot the second day. So that was a bonus.
Nice.
And the craziest thing about it was, and I don't know if it was because I'd been through it once, and my legs weren't as beat up as I thought they were going to be, but all of a sudden I found my downhill legs again. And I was able to keep Michael in touch on the downhills, and it was so much fun. I was like, wow, where was this yesterday? Alan dropped off a bit, but Michael and I kept going, and we were like animals, tracking animals, hunting down runners in the latter half of the race. It was such a cool experience. You may recall that at the Squamish 50, the 50-50 bibs are half red and half blue. And you wear the same one both days. And it can be super demoralizing if you're running the 50K only.
I've been there, 100%. When you get overtaken by a 50-50, it's the worst. Yes. It is the absolute worst.
Yeah, you hear somebody coming behind you and yelling on your right or on your left. And you do that, you just do that little side eye to look down, on, where they put their bib, and when you see that flash of red that indicates, oh my God, that's a 50-50 bib, you're just ready to crawl off the trail and into a ball and cry. So it was such a cool experience to actually be those guys for a change, because I had that experience in the 50K a couple years earlier. But it was such a fantastic experience. I still don't know how we did it.
I can see that if you're fit, if your body is fit enough and trained enough, you might hate getting out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
But I think you can sort of warm your muscles and tendons and joints and bones and everything up to the point that you can get moving again. I can see that.
I think, and I kind of think some of it's mental too. Like, I've had these experiences, in past marathons where, I might catch a cold or something the week of the race, which may not actually be a cold. I'm starting to think that it has something to do with, your body sort of recovering, but it feels like a cold. But somehow, miraculously on race day, it disappears. I remember going down to the Seattle Marathon one year, and I was on antibiotics, and I was struggling. I'd had the flu, and I was like, "Oh my God, I don't know if I'm going to be able to race." I was thinking about dropping down to the half marathon. I woke up and I felt like $1 million on race day. So I kind of wonder how much of it is mental that, my body knows, okay, you've got a big challenge ahead, save the crying and whining and soreness for the next day. And that, I probably completely out to lunch on that, but that was part of how I felt.
I think adrenaline is very powerful medicine, right?
For sure.
So I had two practical questions for you. 50-50, since it's something that's not too far in the past for you and something that I'm actively interested in. How did you do anything particular to prevent chafing? Because that would be something that could really destroy you on the second day, right? I mean, if you have too many blisters, too many sort of skin issues, did you do anything? That's number one question. And number two question is, when it comes to gear, did you get a second hydration pack? Like, did you have a second pack ready to go so you can sort of just plop in from the first day, relax, and you have fresh gear? Because usually when I come out back to a hotel room from after a big race, I don't want to see any of my gear for the next 3 weeks.
Right. Yes. No, I didn't. So let's see if I can answer all the questions. I think they're sort of intertwined. So I think I was just basically using squirrel's nut butter.
Okay.
If I I don't know if I should.
No, absolutely,
anyway,
absolutely. We love squirrel's nut butter.
It was pretty good stuff. I think I might have chafed a little bit. The post-run shower surprise.
Right.
But I think I put enough of it on that I was feeling relatively safe. The other thing, I wasn't wearing a pack.
Oh, okay.
We had discovered the naked belt, which is just basically a band, and you can hold enough stuff. It's not as flattering because you got this thing and you got all the pocket stuffed, so it looks like you've got the total muffin top thing going. Anyway, so it's but I was amazed. So I got these two Solomon the flexible flasks, 500 milliliters, and I was able to stuff two of those into my naked belt. I think the fact that I have a large enough circumference that my naked belt is big enough to hold two of those and still have room for gels and stuff is probably a plus. But so that was all we used for packs. So I had free hands, and then it was just a matter of so because I kind of think in the past, having worn sort of a vest or a pack, that can just tear the crap out of my back. Yeah. And so not having to worry about that, just making sure that I was, pretty lubed up around where the naked belt was. And it's not a particularly abrasive fabric either. It was an eye-opening experience having free hands and, not having, I don't know how much difference the extra weight of carrying handheld water bottles is. But being able to just tuck these flasks into a belt, and there's enough aid stations on course that they fill up. But I did kind of worry about having, maybe I should buy a second one for that second day. But I just rinsed it out, and it's a pretty light fabric. I just rinsed it out, hung it up, and it was dry enough the next day that it wasn't an issue. But that was a game changer. I wish I'd had a naked belt way back in the old days instead of wearing all the crap that I used to wear.
Yeah, this is a good idea. Squamish doesn't allow poles, which I think which I totally understand. I mean, I'm fine with, but I'm a big pole guy, and that's something that I would have to particularly train for. But yeah, if you have always something in your hands, it does distract you from regularly fueling, right? Because you're and so if you have your hands free, then you can. I will
say that a water bottle has saved my hands more than a few times.
Yes, I've had that experience too.
And having that cushion that saves the palm of my hand from imminent danger.
I've actually had even a hydration pack with two front-facing flasks save me before. I once bombed down a trail and got my foot trip on a route, and I fully fell forward. And literally it was like an airbag. It totally prevented me from slamming my chin into the ground. So there's one for wearing a full vest, I guess.
Yeah. And a helmet.
And a helmet is next. Oh my goodness. Amazing. All right. I mean, you've definitely rekindled my excitement for racing and trying to head back up to Squamish. It's been a few years. My wife has run the 23K, so we've always combined it with a family vacation. We've spent a few days in Squamish, run the races, and then we go up to Whistler and sort of relax as a family and at a pool or so. So that's always been super fun. So we got to go back up. All right, very last topic. Yes. Every single street. You did it before it was cool.
I guess I did it before it was cool. I'd had ideas about this, doing something dumb like this.
It is dumb for you because Vancouver is a gigantic city, right?
Yeah,
my little Olympia, I was able to fairly easy do in about 2 months, right? Without trying too hard.
But that was super impressive.
Well, thank you. But I loved it.
Yeah, it's a very cool experience. I saw parts of the city that I would have no reason to ever go to. And, it made, as big as Vancouver is, it made it feel smaller. Just because I knew all the places. Like I live sort of roughly in the center of town, and I've moved since then, which actually helped because it moved me closer to some of the places that I hadn't been. Cause I had certain rules about how I was doing it that, I tried to limit driving to a place to run. So I needed to be able to run from home. Occasionally if my daughter had a field trip or something, I would drop her off and like bang out the neighborhood there or something like that. I know I definitely did that a few times. And, it's kind of a weird thing, but with the technology today, being able to present like a heat map of everywhere that you run in a city, it's kind of a cool accomplishment. But I had first had this idea when I had started running in 2004. I think I'd been at it back running. I started running again in 2003, and I actually had like a paper map of the city of Vancouver, and I was thinking of taking a highlighter, and every street I ran, I would do this. So when Strava came along, all of a sudden it was like, oh, I don't have to do that. I kind of set that aside, that hand drawn version of it aside, because that was just silly. But Strava was definitely the inspiration. Having a heat map and having all your stuff there in one place. But the real thing that helped me, like, what did you use?
So I did Strava too.
Yeah.
So I use Google Maps to give me the outline of my city. And then I imported Strava into Google Maps. But I realized that Google Maps has a limit of how many files, GPX files you can upload.
Oh, okay.
And so basically I had to use an app by an indie developer friend of mine from Spokane called Topo Maps Plus.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Yeah, and they have a Mac version where you can upload GPX files into a folder, and then you can sort of combine them there. But they combined for Google, so they treat it as a single file, but because of the date stamp, you can still highlight it in different colors.
Oh, right, yeah.
Right?
You did it in different colors. Yeah.
Because I knew that I sort of wanted sort of every individual run to be sort of visible and separated from each other, which helped from a planning point of view. But so there was this very complicated step in between to kind of overcome the limitations with Google, where you recorded it in Strava and then you exported it, and I think like every 10 runs, I pushed it into topo maps that I then combined into one file that I uploaded into Google, just to kind of make that possible. So that's sort of like it's super technical, but that sort of allowed me that gray, colorful map that I was then also able to, not just as a screenshot, but share publicly, right? And it was important then also from a planning, because I did spend lots of time trying to prepare my runs, because I just wanted to minimize running the same streets and absolutely minimize missing a couple blocks, because that would have been heartbreaking, right?
Yes, yeah.
And also because I wanted to finish it up in a short period of time. Well, a friend of mine is doing it in Tacoma, and Tacoma is a lot bigger than Olympia. But he sort of has done it now over like 2 or 3 years, right? And so he goes to a pocket and does that, and then he does other stuff, and then he goes back, right? So it's taking him a lot longer, right?
That's interesting. So, go ahead.
No, it's just the planning phase was really something where I felt like, looking back, like I almost spent as much time planning this than I actually spent running it.
I don't know if I was quite like that, but I poured over the maps and went looking for stuff. And that was one of the drawbacks about Strava is like, I'm not sure what your Google Maps did, but like Strava tiles images. Like it takes like basically shots. And so you can only get so much detail when you zoom in on a Strava heat map. And I came across, I don't know, anyway, there's this single developer out of Massachusetts, named James Chevalier. He does City Strides, and City Strides imports all your Strava data or whatever platform you use, and it maintains vector-based maps, so you can zoom in and get absolute fine detail. And the other thing that he set it up to do was to show you a percentage of the city that you have run. And this became like an obsession, especially because in the beginning, when I first discovered this, he didn't just have streets. He had buildings. If buildings had names that were tagged in the metadata, buildings would appear. And so he had buildings, and he had park boundaries. He even had rivers, which was just insane because you couldn't run the Fraser River. And it'd be like, I want to get to 100%, but I can't because there's a stupid river or a lake or whatever. Or Lost Lagoon in Stanley Park. You got to go like you got to bushwhack through because you're trying to run the outline of the lake, which in many cases is inaccessible. So he worked out a lot of those bugs. And I think he took out too many things. He even took out trails now, which seems insane to me. You know, if a trail has a name, it should be there. But one of the things that it helped was, I had guys who were watching me doing this, and David Myers, he's a multiple-time finisher of the Squamish 50-50. He would occasionally, message me, "Hey, dude, you missed the spot."
That's the worst.
So he would go in and he would like look at my map really close, and he'd point out streets that I was missing, and it's actually kind of helpful. But the other thing about City Strides, it tells you where all your incomplete streets are, and so I would be constantly poring over this list of incomplete streets and seeing what nodes of the street I was missing, because there's kind of a science to it because it's all vector based. You have to run a certain number of nodes. I think it was like 90% of the nodes on a street for it to be counted as complete, which, can kind of create, especially in a grid system, you could run all the vertical streets and skip all the horizontal streets, and you'd still get credit for both in some cases, which seems kind of cheating because it's based on that math. But, the purists will do every single street. And one of the things I found as I was approaching 100% in the streets, because he had buildings, and a lot of the buildings that were named were like store names or commercial streets, you had to run the back alleys behind them in order to get the 4 nodes of a building. Most buildings would have at minimum 4 corners, so you'd have to do all 4 in order for it to count as complete. So I found myself running lanes, and next thing I knew, I was running every lane in the city as well. And,
Oh man.
Vancouver's pretty much got a lane for every street. And unfortunately, they were harder to find, because most lanes in Vancouver don't have names. So they don't appear as incomplete streets. You got to eyeball it. So, yeah, it's just...
I mean, that using that app, I think, makes the project way more challenging and daunting, because I looked at it when I first started and decided to against it, because I think at that time he didn't have date-based, so you couldn't narrow that time frame. And I really wanted to run the whole city as one project, right? And not just like, oh yeah, I've ran this road 3 years ago and now it shows up on City Stride, so I don't have to do it again, right? I wanted to sort of do it as one project, and that wasn't really possible back.
That is a good point, because that date filter has helped me plan my mask runs.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there we go. Exactly.
I look back, I'll go back a month. Okay, what streets haven't I run in the last month? Because chances are I'm going to find more masks on those than ones that I ran, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I strategically parked my cars at public schools, because they had parking lots, and so I was able to sort of plan from there. I tried to minimize driving too, but in the end I was like, I want to get it done and not run too many miles. But as you said right in the beginning, I think getting to know your city in that way, being able to see places that you've never seen before, it gives you a different sense of belonging and ownership. I mean, I didn't grow up here on the West Coast. I didn't grow up in this country, right? And to be able to sort of experience a city that way was a really, really special experience.
Yeah, and I know guys that, I'm not saying it's the reason they moved, but there's one guy in particular, Mitch LeBlanc, former winner of the Orcas Island 100. He used to live in Burnaby, and he did all of Burnaby, or almost all of Burnaby. And the next thing I knew, he moved, and then he just kept moving. He's now out in Chilliwack. So I used to joke that maybe, once I'd finished, I'll have to move and find a new town. But he actually literally did it. So,
so you don't think it wasn't the housing prices in Vancouver that made him move?
Silly me. That's exactly what it was. But I like my story better.
For sure. I presented it to a city agency after I was finished in a PowerPoint presentation, and one person spoke up and said, you missed the street. And I was like, no, I didn't. And she's like, yes, this is in the city limits and I live on this street and you missed it. And I'm like, you are kidding me. But I just took the Google outline. And so I wasn't 100% city limits at that point.
City Strides would have told you that.
I guess so. I don't know if they have any more updated. Here in Olympia, there are weird pockets where there is Olympia city limits, and then there is unincorporated Olympia, which is still Olympia. Right. And running in unincorporated Olympia is a lot of open road where cars drive at 50 miles an hour, and you have very narrow curbs. And so I was like, it's not fun to run out there, right? Not at all. And so because people then also say, oh, you should do Thurston County next. Why don't you expand it out? And I was like, I would take on a different project, but what was the most fun, and that's why it would be fun to do it in a city as dense as Vancouver, is that the blocks give you a lot of a sense of accomplishment, wherein if you do it out in the country, right, and you're like, okay, my project today is run 5 miles this direction and then turn around and then run 5 miles back, and I've got this one street and that's my run today. Wow. It's also fun to it out there.
Yeah, the other thing I found too, especially once I was working with City Strides, is they use OpenStreetMap, so it's an open source mapping, and I kept finding mistakes, and like a school would be misnamed, or there'd be a road that wasn't actually a road, or there'd be all these different things, and eventually I was like, oh, what's this button? There was a little button that said, do you see a mistake, report a mistake or something. And then I was like, okay, well, I'll do that. And then it said, you want to fix the mistake faster? Do it yourself. Well, that was the gist of it. So I signed up, and I don't know, I've made hundreds of edits to maps in various cities that I've run because I have firsthand knowledge that whatever it was in the OpenStreetMap database was incorrect, and I've gone in and fixed them. So there's a little public service there too by running every street.
You see, this is where the designer and the runner comes together, right? I think these kind of fun projects that we sort of dream up, they give us a little bit of a meaning and stuff. So it's amazing.
And then there's the nitpicky designer, because occasionally they'd be like, oh, look how badly they drew this road. I got to straighten it out.
Yeah, that's part. It's all part of it. That's amazing.
Now, you don't have any like gated communities in Olympia, do you?
No, there wasn't any. There were some like cul-de-sacs where I ran down where I was like, oh, this is interesting here, but nothing gated. No. Yeah. So I'm sure there's cities where there's tons of them. Mm-hmm. We had like a handful of them, and a lot of times it was like I'd be running along and all of a sudden the gate would open, and I'm like, doo-dee-doo-dee-doo, wait for the car to leave, and then I'd sneak in, run to the end of the street, and then sneak out again. And like some of them I had to go back multiple times, and it was like driving me crazy because, they weren't close to my house or anything. So I was like, it was like trying my luck, and I lucked out so many times. There was one year we had a huge snowfall, and like the gate was stuck open on one of these little gated streets. So I was able to get in and quickly get out again before anybody noticed me. Yeah. And I had another one. I dropped my daughter off at track practice, and I ran down this sort of long greenway we've got down into South Van, where I knew there was a gate, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to, and right as I got there, the mailman showed up, and he had a code to get in. So I just like hovered around behind him. As soon as he went in the gate, I just like ran in and quickly ran to the end of this thing and back out again. And I was like, I felt like I was some conquering hero because I had finally completed this stupid street and could, lay claim to, a lot of people just, would rely on bad GPS signal to kind of get some of these streets. Oh, it's like, I did it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, they'd swing by it, and City Strides would calculate that, yes, you completed all the nodes or enough nodes, and they would get credit for a street that they hadn't quite gotten just because their GPS was slightly inaccurate and hit all the nodes on the street that City Strides had. So,
that's where technology can be unforgiving, right? Because if GPS is out of whack, it can work for your advantage, but it can also work against your advantage. It's like, oh, you didn't do that. Like, wait, no, I did that.
Yeah, like downtown Vancouver is terrible. Like, my GPS bounces all over the place. I had a building that I must have run around a dozen times before it finally hit all the nodes. So, no, I didn't run it all in one go, but, I had to make a few trips. But
I remember 2 blocks or 2 like country-ish roads where I know where it was really tricky to figure out how far back you had to go in order for Google Maps to show it that you went all the way, because there are certain streets that they feel like they turn into private streets somewhere, right? Yes. And depending on how loud the dog barks, I was being flexible with myself in those moments. I was like, okay, you know what? I think we're good here. I think I will comfortably turn around here.
Yeah, I absolutely had a few of those. And we've also got a section in Vancouver along our ports where it's like pretty high security. And you don't really know because you're going over, like they have a couple of overpasses that you can go over, and you can't see the other side, whether there's like somebody in the guard booth or something, or if there's a security guard coming the other direction. So it's just like you're taking a chance. And these overpasses, you're up high enough, you can't go, oh, I accidentally did this. Ooh, what am I doing here? And, I've been over there a bunch of times, and I've managed to map out everything that I could on the secure side. Yes, authorities, come and get me. And, I kind of cleaned up some of the nodes so that other people could do it without getting themselves into like trouble in the really high security areas that aren't really roads. They're like, container terminal, like it's a terminal container, storage and stuff that really isn't a road, but whoever originally drew the map in OpenStreetMaps had mapped it out as if it was a road. And they've taken them all out now. So it's like, because it's technically, you're not supposed to be running these streets. So basically any street that's like legitimately private or restricted access, they've taken out of the CityStrats database. And I was like, no. So I'm like, all these guys who say they've run 100% of Vancouver and they haven't run Centennial and Stewart and all these streets on the port side of the security fence. I'm like, oh, come on, you're not a real every single streeter.
You know that you've run it for yourself. That's
exactly. And I've taken a few people with me just to guys that might have been a little hesitant, that I've taken on this ridiculous quest. So
that is
anyway.
Amazing. David, you have given me so much of your time. I loved every single minute of it.
Oh,
this
me
was
too.
An absolute incredible conversation. I have one.
I hope you can squeeze it into an episode.
I know, right? I might have to turn it into a 2-parter. That would be amazing. I'll see what it ends up being. I have one last request from my wife.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So there's an ice cream place in Vancouver called Perverted Ice Cream. Do you know of it? Have you been there?
Perverted Ice Cream?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
Oh my God.
It's called Perverted Ice Cream. Check out their Instagram feed. And it is so, the branding, especially you as a designer, the branding around it, the marketing, I don't know if it's any good, but if the branding and marketing is any indication, then it's amazing. I think it's, chocolate dipped soft serve ice cream, Perverted Ice Cream in Vancouver. And I think they have a couple locations. But it's the fact that you don't even know about it makes this conversation, this question, even more exciting, because you have to try it out and you have to report back, because we have found out about Perverted just before COVID. And we've usually in the last few years always went up there once a year. And we have not been able to go. And it's on my wife's highest request list that if we do anything on vacation ever again, we have to include a trip to Perverted Ice Cream.
So I'm looking at it right now. Mm-hmm. It's 797 Thurlow Street down in the West End. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a little ways from me, but that's, I run every street, right?
Well, there you go, exactly.
So have you guys done the ice cream tour of Vancouver? Because we've got a lot of cool ice cream places.
You do have a lot, and the ice cream that we usually love is Alice and Broom out in Squamish.
Yeah.
They make absolute incredible ice cream, and so we have not heard of the ice cream tour. No.
And sponsors of the Squamish 50.
Exactly, I know.
So I was curious if you guys had tried all the ice cream in Vancouver and found they were the best, or if that was one that you guys liked and you haven't seen any of the other ones. Because I've got an ice cream shop 2 blocks from me, Innocent Ice Cream, that's pretty good. And there's Rain or Shine and Ernest Ice Cream. Yeah, we got that as lots of them. And then the gelato places to satisfy the people who like their ice cream Italian.
Well, I'm, German, so for me, I always go for gelato in general. That's my preference. Yeah. But we've never been a Perverted. It's just something that I don't even know how it popped up on our radar. I think on one of our many trips up to Vancouver, you start following some of the cool donut places and, food shops and stuff, right? And you have incredible food up in Vancouver. And so we've stumbled upon this Perverted Ice Cream place, and we've been stalking them for the entire pandemic faithfully.
So now I'm going to have to make a trip.
Now you have to make a trip for us, and we have to.
It probably has something to do with the name. Having a unique name like that.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. There is a chance that it's not even good, but I doubt it, right? Because it's so outrageous. The marketing.
I think it's an interesting juxtaposition that that's perverted ice cream and I've got innocent ice cream 2 blocks from me. So
you go.
You got both ends of the spectrum.
Absolutely. No, I mean, when we come up, if you have a recommendation for another ice cream place, I mean, we'll stop by for sure.
Now I'm going to have to. This is just what I need to shed my pandemic weight.
Try out all the ice cream. Well, I mean, that's.
However, we have an ice cream and donut running club in Vancouver where they basically that's their theme. They go and they do a run and hit up an ice cream shop, and you kind of justify gorging on ice cream after your little your high-spirited 5K run around the neighborhood.
Well, I mean, in many ways you could say that's why we run, right?
Yes.
So we can eat.
It is absolutely an excuse to eat or drink if that's your thing too.
Exactly. All right, David. Thank you so much. Oh, before we go, I almost forgot. Do you want to send some links people's way so they can check you out, follow you, say hi to you?
Sure. Well, you can find me. Broadway Run Club is my Instagram and Twitter handle. Also, BroadwayRunClub.com is an old website that I put together when we sort of had a loosely affiliated run club. I also lead running groups out of the Distance Runwear store on Main Street in Vancouver. We call ourselves Distance Run Club. We have runs twice a week. You can find me there. Obviously, I'm on Strava. I'm on City Strides, although that's not as exciting. But so if you would like to wear my work, you can sign up for Squamish, or Squamish 50, or any of the Coast Mountain Trail running races like Diaz Vista, Wham, Buck and Hell, Survival of the Fittest. I'm sure I'm missing a few. Conquer the Better, the new one.
Conquer the Better, exactly. And sadly, not Sky Pilot anymore, right?
No, Sky Pilot went away. I think the main reason it did initially was the gondola cable was snapped.
Yeah, I know. Twice in a row, right?
Yeah. So that's kind of, if you can't get people back down, then it's a little bit harder. But I think that was part of the reason. Permitting was just hell, I think, too, for that one. But so it may come back, it may not. I don't know. But they also had to put Cap Crusher on hold this year. But they're bringing back they've got a virtual series, the Sixer series that they have. They've changed up some of the distances, but which is great because then I had to redesign half the logos or the badges. Thanks, Gary. But whatever. It's not a big deal. I'm a professional. I can handle it.
There we go. This is what you do.
Yeah.
Super, David. Thanks for the conversation.
Thanks, Matthias.